I did have to participate where I had to hold a beer out
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
straight out. That was I did not win that contest.
We
I was a
were
little.
talking to someone about that. No. No, never mind. No, I was watching a TikTok. I was talking to someone.
Hey, adventurers! Welcome to Let's Just Go podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Kayla. And this week, Chris is reliving for us his Oktoberfest river cruise that he literally just got back from last night.
Fresh off the 7,000-hour plane ride. Uh, yep. Actually, home for less than 24 hours. So happy to be reliving it.
Yeah.
When you go on a 7-day river cruise, so much is packed in, you forget. They showed a little video at the end, and I'm like, I forgot we did that because so long ago. So have you ever done a river cruise?
I haven't. I'm doing one in December. So 2.5 months from now.
Yep. And you're sailing on the Rhine, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was on the Danube, and it's interesting because I was talking with the staff. So they have to do different, like the ship sizes are different that sail on each river because
Oh.
of the locks that are on that river, the bridge height, and so forth. So it sounds like the Danube has to be a little wider and shorter,
Hmm.
and then the Rhine is a little more narrow but higher in height. So it's an interesting. I will have to say, I mean, I saw many cool things, but going through a lock during the daytime was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And it's not the point of the trip, but
Wait, have you never seen locks before? Or have you just never been in a boat going through them?
I've never been in a yeah, I've never been
Okay.
in it. I mean, I've seen videos of locks.
Oh, wait, you've
Uh,
never seen them in real life?
no, where would I have seen a fucking lock?
Okay, so listen, I have to, first of all, in Seattle, there's locks. And so in Ballard, and that's like a neighborhood in Seattle. And then in San Antonio on the Riverwalk, there are locks because the main downtown area where the river is a lot lower than the rest of the natural river. So it's mostly used by like not I guess maintenance boats, but also there's a ferry that you can take, like a little river tour thing, and they go through it. So that's I guess I've just come from a world where I think it's normal to see and
Yeah,
experience locks.
I could be very wrong, but I don't know if in the Northeast there's any locks outside of in the Great Lakes.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
believe that.
So no, my worldly travels have never had me see a lock before, so that was my excitement.
That's exciting. Yeah.
We did a Danube river cruise that was somewhat Oktoberfest themed. It did start in Budapest, in Hungary, and then we went to Bratislava in Slovakia, and then we were in several ports in Austria, and it ended in Germany with 2 ports in Germany, and we ended there about an hour and a half from Munich, and so got to spend an extra day in Munich during our actual Oktoberfest, which was a sight to be seen for sure.
So outside of the lock, what was your favorite part of the trip?
I think for me, it was seeing the history that is, as anytime you go to Europe, right? 500, 600 plus years. We don't see that here in the United States, right?
No.
We're way too young of a country to see that. So to be standing in Passau, Germany, and be looking up at the castle on the hill, which has the date 1499 on it, and then the fortress wall being from 1200 something, right? Like 1,000 years old. Those sorts of things, or even being in probably my favorite town that we went to was Salzburg, not because it was where the Do Re Mi
Oh,
was
yeah,
filmed.
Sound of Music, yeah.
I liked that right next to the fountain that they sing as they walk around is the Mirabelle Palace, which was built by the Catholic bishop for his girlfriend. So, that's definitely normal. Um,
Back when Catholicism allowed girlfriends for bishops.
yes, yes, yeah.
Back then.
At least we've been consistently messed up.
Inconsistent.
Yeah, yeah. Well, have we? I don't know. They've had girlfriends, they've had boyfriends. I don't know. The town of Salzburg is unlike anything I've ever seen, and I'm not going to be able to describe it in any way that is helpful. But basically, you see a row of buildings that just look like old buildings that have been there, like things you've seen, and then maybe every three buildings there's a cut through, and it goes into it's. Picture like an Excel grid, and the lines are the buildings, but in between all of the buildings, you could walk in between different pathways that had tons of stores and shops, and
Oh,
that's where
cool.
Mozart's his birth house was, and then the house that he. I mean, so what you see and what you end up walking into are two very different things. So I think for me, that element of surprise was really cool, really cool.
Yeah.
So that was probably my favorite part. I mean, seeing history that was, and by the end, I'm like, all right, enough Baroque abbeys and churches. But
Yeah.
honestly, regardless of the religion, that the architecture is astounding. And when you think back to when they did that and what was available to them in terms of technology and so forth, so some of
Yeah.
that is it doesn't really get old. I mean, I was complaining, typical.
What? Not you. No way.
But I thought, that was also one of my favorite parts. And honestly, trying all the different food, it's not exactly my thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
schnitzel, and I mean, I can get behind apple strudel any day.
How was the apple strudel? It looked so good.
It was very good. It was
Yeah.
very, very good. We did an apple strudel making like class. They explained how to make it, and we've tried marzipan, which in a couple different stops. So it was. I ate my way through Central Europe.
How was the
Um,
food on the ships, though? Or on the ship, singular, not
so
plural.
the food was pretty good on the ship, and like every night they had a different beer. So what
That's
people don't really talk about, right? Like you think Germany, you think beer, but Hungary is also really known for beer. Slovakia, same, and lots of vineyards, right? So tons of different wine options. So on the ship, each night they had beer and wine from those locations that we were
that's
stopped at.
cool. Yeah.
Um, and the food was often also themed to something similar, like around my thing though. So let's pause and just talk about river cruising in general, right?
Yeah.
Is it for everybody? Like, should you go? I think the answer is yes, right? There's a few advantages. One, you only unpack once, right? uh,
Mhm.
that's to me honestly one of the best advantages. In most cases though, I don't know what I expected, but I was expecting more of like um, we would be sailing more on the river and like looking at things. That intentionally only happened one afternoon. Most
Mhm.
times we were sailing at night, which again is fine. You wake up in a new place and you can be off and running. Um, the average age is coming down for river cruises.
Hmm.
We know it's honestly usually in the 60, 70 range, but depending on the cruise, the company and the itinerary, it could be much lower than that. Um, we had a pretty diverse group from people in their early 30s all the way up into their late 70s. So it was definitely a mix of people.
I will say yours was an adult exclusive, right? So there weren't children on this specific sailing.
Yeah, so the company I went on AMA Waterways, and it was partnered with Adventures by Disney, but AMA Waterways does allow children. Viking, for example, which many people associate with river cruising, that is strictly adult. Every single itinerary is adult, so AMA does allow children on it, but the one I was on was an adult exclusive, so no children on that. Most of the ships are the same, regardless of which company you were sailing with. I was shocked to see how many river cruises there were going on. Like, Viking
Really?
had at any time, Viking might have had 6 ships surrounding us, scenic. I mean, all the companies that you and I are familiar with in terms of, but like at Budapest, I would say at least a dozen river cruise
Wow.
ships docked at any given time there. Um, Sometimes at one point there were 3 AMA waterways ships at once. And what they do is it's called rafting. So they dock next to each other because there's only so many ports. So they dock next, which is awkward because I open my blinds and you're right up to, you're like, oh, hey there.
I saw a TikTok video of that though, because then so if you're the ship that's not on the I was gonna say pier, but you're not on a pier. But like if you're not the ship that is against land, then you have to walk across that ship to get to your ship. Is that right?
That is correct. So
Interesting.
in most cases, it's the same company ships that are docked, but once um, we did not have the same company docked, and they had to go up onto the top deck and then down, which was interesting. Yeah. So, but otherwise, you just cut through the main, past the reception desk of the other
Yeah.
ships and cut right through. Most of them, though, similar in setup, right? It was cold. It was colder than normal. It was, highs of like 55, and it was cloudy or misty
Oof.
and rainy. It was a little rough. So, but on the top deck, they have a walking track, a pool that's heated. And I only saw 2 people in there one time. But lots of lounge areas. There's a whole lounge and bar on the one floor, and then the dining room is beneath. So the food, going back to the food, I think my one and only issue is at dinner time, the only time to eat, it was often at 7. Sometimes it was at 7:30, and sometimes 7:45 dinner was, which
It is so
it was,
late for me.
it was so late. I'm like, damn it. The one time it was at 5:30 or 7, you could pick. And the reason that was is because there was an excursion after that. So
Oh.
yeah, they had a wine and beer tasting in a brewery at night, or you could go to like
It
a
was a
Mozart.
concert, right?
Yeah, so you could pick one of those 2 things and go. Honestly, at that point, I skipped, and I was like,
Did you really? You didn't go to either one?
skipped 2 different excursions. But I mean, there were I promise you, when you go on yours, you're going to be like, holy. But what was nice is most times, not always, but most times it's docked in a place where you can just go out and walk around and see things. So there were times twice we, had met friends on the ship, and we went and got pizza. Like we just
Nice.
went to a local place and got pizza because that was my only other issue with dinner is like it's a commitment of a 2-hour,
Yeah.
right? Like you're ordering an app and a soup and a entree and then a dessert, and so for me, that was probably the one thing that I didn't love. And I like after being on some days were 12-hour tours.
Oh
After being on a
God.
12-hour tour, I don't want to sit for 2 hours and be like social, right? I want to grab a slice of pizza and then be
Yeah.
done. That river cruising in general, though, not for everybody. The rooms are nice and big. And you are definitely forced to engage with other people, like almost immediately. We talked
Yay.
about in this case, there were no tables for 2, right? Like you had to sit with other people for lunch or for dinner, and even in the lounge, like you have to engage, right? So you
Mhm.
kind of find your people, and then they become your people for the rest of the trip. We went from Hungary to Germany, but obviously
Mhm.
the next cruise was going to turn around and go like Germany back down to Hungary. So they do at times do different itineraries depending upon which way they're going, right?
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, so they spend more time sailing different directions, and sometimes skip other ports or stop at other places. So it was an interesting to hear. It depends on which way they're going. I think my biggest surprise was Bratislava. I mean, going to Slovakia was never really on my list.
I don't really know
Uh,
anything about Slovakia, so like that makes sense.
yeah, well, I
Yeah.
learned. So that was probably the biggest surprise because it was such a cool city, with old a palace, a castle up on a hill, a really old church, right? I mean, typical
Yeah.
Europe kind of scene. Lots of good restaurants and stores to sort of walk around. And it was built, a fortress was around the city, and parts of that still exist. So, anytime that, again, things we don't really see in the US.
No, not at all.
So going back to the ship, if you're into like fitness though and things, I talked about the walking track. They do have a massage.
Room.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was more. They had a salon, which again was a very small room, and then they had a gym, which honestly no more than three people could be in at any one time. I think
Oh
it
my
had
gosh.
like two weight machines, a few free weights, and one treadmill, which was actually interesting because it was in the floor, so that you didn't.
Oh, because of the height. Yeah, that makes sense. That's funny.
So that was it. I mean, somebody could be on the treadmill and maybe three other people, two other people at the most, in there is very, you know, but again, we walked 5, sometimes almost upwards of 10 miles a day.
Wow. That's a lot.
It was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah.
The furthest we were on a bus, because you're doing buses and right, like, because sometimes
Yeah.
the things are by the port. So the furthest we were on would have been about an hour and 40 minutes.
Okay.
And that's when we went to Salzburg. It was not near, Salzburg is not near the Danube.
Yeah. Yeah. And I told you this, but if you've never been to Europe, which for Chris, this was his first time, just know that like to get anywhere, you're on a bus. Like my first trip to Europe was actually a multi-week trip with a bunch of high schoolers. And I was saying to Brian the other day that we lived on the bus and like we stayed in hotels, but like every day we got on the same bus. We had the same like, we had a driver that drove us we started in Spain and we ended in Greece, and we were on that bus. And, like, our trip last year when we were in Greece, we were on a bus for a very long time. Like, if you're doing any sort of organized group travel, bus is the only way to get you anywhere. And the bus drivers are so skilled. It's terrifying. Like, you
Yeah.
will watch them and you will be like, "Oh my god, they're gonna fucking crash. What's happening?" And then they do like a 20-point turn to get around the sharpest corner that you've ever seen in your life, and no problem.
Yes. Yeah, that happened. And I was like, what is
Mhm.
going on? We visited the town of Mansi, which was where the church of in Austria, which is where the church was used for um, the Sound of Music when they got married at the end. And so we visited that, and then we had lunch there, and we drove along the lake of in Mansi, and I thought we were going to die and hit a car and roll into the lake. I mean, it was. I was like, I shouldn't have sat in the front, so I didn't have to see.
Yeah.
It is wild, and I mean, it is. It's what you have to do, right? And you're there one
Mhm.
time, so you kind of have to do it. And
That's good.
the other part of that, what's amazing is all of along the river is built. These ports are built for river cruise
Yeah.
tourists, right? So they have like a whole bus lane that can come real close to the boat, the ship, and so they can keep it moving. But places like Vienna, for example, the places that you want to see are not near
Mhm.
um, the river. So we went to the palace, and it was probably a 35-minute 40 it was almost 40 minutes, but it was really because we were driving through the city of Vienna, which is a huge
Oh,
pop.
yeah.
And not every place did Uber, and most did, but not everywhere. So if
Yeah.
you wanted to cut off on your own, and I think that's what I loved most about it. Like in most cases, there was the right level of organized. And then
Mhm.
if you didn't want to do that, you didn't have to, right? Like you could always break off and do your own thing, see your own thing, spend more time somewhere. Um, even when we were in the palace in Vienna, which was again so crazy, right? Like the family that owned the palace, one of the families, the empress, um, her daughter was Maria. One of her 16 daughters was 16 children was Marie Antoinette, right? Like, and you're
Oh,
like, oh, and then Napoleon's son died in that palace, and you're standing there, and you're like, what? It really all the history that comes together, and you're like, oh, all the ones
yeah.
you learned about standing where, multiple people you've in different versions of history you've
Yeah.
they do have bathrooms on the bus, which is important for me.
Mm, but like also they're best bathrooms. So like take that as you
Yeah,
will.
no, they are for emergency use only. But
Yeah.
for me, I like my anxiety is around just knowing that I have access to something, right? So I'm like, all
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
something really bad happens. At least I'm not shitting my pants. I mean, I still might, but I can then sit in the bathroom for the rest of the trip.
Oh my God. So, okay,
Uh,
all in all, would you do it again?
I think I would do it again. Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
I feel like there's an
Uh,
asterisk on that.
no, because other we were asking, the group that we were with, and we were asking each other that. And would you do it again? Some people most people said yes. I would definitely try the Rhine. Um, you know, I think you don't know until you don't know, right? It's a perfect appetizer, right? And you
Yeah.
see just enough. Like, would I want to spend more time in Budapest? Maybe, or Vienna? Yes, right. Like,
Mhm.
I would love to go back there, but I probably never will, right? And so, um, you don't know that until you've experienced those places, though, to know, like, oh, I wish I could have spent more time here
Yeah.
or there. So, and there's so much to see.
Yeah. I get that. I mean, I think that you're right. Like river cruising is one of those things where for my river cruise specifically, I know that I'm starting in Basel. I've never heard of Basel. I don't know what I know where it is now because I'm, booking a trip. And we end in Amsterdam. And I'm like, cool, I know where Amsterdam is. I couldn't tell you where a single place. I've never heard of any of our destinations. But I know because I'm specifically doing a Christmas markets cruise, and I know that there's going to be Christmas markets everywhere I go, and that's what matters. Like I was surprised that your cruise was considered Oktoberfest, but that like in terms of the things you were doing, like ours, all of our excursions are like Christmas geared, right? Like it is over. We will be on the ship for Christmas, but it's just interesting to me that it sounds like yours wasn't as themed, I guess, as I'm expecting ours to
They
be.
did some activities at night that were themed towards
Yeah.
Oktoberfest, and then the beers each night. Like,
Yeah.
but no, I mean, not until, and then we had the ship had its own Oktoberfest party on the last night. Um,
Hmm.
we were in Vilshofen, Germany, and the local beer queen came. There's a beer queen, like sash and all. You have to be between 18 and 25, can drink your outfit, and then you're judged and voted beer queen,
It's like Miss America, but for beer.
but with beer. Um, so, this cute girl is the beer queen. She's talking about the different dances that they, bringing the culture aspect to it. And then they had a
Yeah.
band playing pretzels. I have not eaten so many pretzels in my life, which for me is
I love
perfect.
pretzels.
I will
Yeah.
say I do love a Philly pretzel, though. I'm going to be honest
I
with you. A
do love a
Philly
Philly pretzel.
and
Yeah.
these weren't bad. But what I will say is, in most places, they cut the huge pretzel in half and made sandwiches and things were like really grilled, like really good cheese, like
Yum.
over it. I can't explain it, but they
Mhm.
do different things with the pretzels that we don't do here that I think we
Yeah.
should adopt.
So then did your trip, like did your Adventures by Disney trip include going to Oktoberfest in Munich, or was that something that you did on your own?
Completely on your own.
Okay.
So that the ship went Saturday to Saturday. Saturday morning, we were closest to Munich. Some people took a transfer to the airport because they were going right home.
Mhm.
Many people went to Munich for a day or two. Um, Oktoberfest ends the first Sunday of October. It goes for 2 weeks, and it ends the first Sunday of October, and then it's 2 weeks before that, right? So
Okay.
it depends on. So some people are like, "Oh, Oktoberfest." It's not always. It's
It's
actually
in
mostly in
September. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Um, but so I got to experience that. Unfortunately, it was raining and pretty cold, but
Yeah.
that didn't actually stop a single person. Plenty of people in German Drindle. I might be saying the word wrong.
Journals. Yeah.
Yep. Females in skirts
And
and
the lederhosen.
men in lederhosen shorts, and
Yeah.
it was 51 degrees and raining, and people could give two shits. I think for me, fail for me, I mean, I knew what Oktoberfest was, and I
Yeah.
knew I've seen the pictures of people, right, in the beer halls with all the beer with 8 billion people packed in.
Yeah.
But I had no idea that it was rows and rows and rows of different beer halls and the largest carnival I've ever seen in my life. Beer halls are really just a fraction of what is at Oktoberfest. Three takeaways from Europe. One, I ordered many pizzas and often they weren't cut. What the fuck?
Oh.
Cut my fucking pizza, bitch. Two, friends in Europe. I don't know if you know this, but stop smoking. Stop fucking smoking. I walked past multiple cigarette vending machines like it was 1982.
Did you walk past condom vending machines? Because that's the other thing that's all over Europe.
No, well,
Oh.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
No, I one vape vending machine, but most were cigarettes. I walked past one in Vienna that was you could get single cigarettes out of.
Genius. That's genius.
Why are we smoking, friends? And you're still smoking in restaurants, and it was a lot of smoking. And then the third thing is there's no security anywhere. I walked into 500-year-old palaces and just fucking walked in like it was your house. I didn't go through 8 million levels of security through Oktoberfest. I don't know how many people are in there, 100,000 at any given time? None.
You know why,
None.
right? It's not America. They're not worried about people having guns and just come. Like,
The
that's not a
interesting
thing.
I was walking out of Oktoberfest and I was like, oh God, we didn't walk through security. And then to the right of the exit is a memorial for the Oktoberfest bombing that happened. So I'm like, friends, friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I loved Munich. I mean, there was not a place I went that I wasn't like, this is amazing. And I think too, just because we don't have all of that really rich history where it's been modernized and ingrained, but at the same time, the architecture around of, the curved cobblestone streets and buildings on hills. And it's just nothing that we see here.
This was an adult exclusive trip. However, I'm wondering, knowing your girls and knowing they're opinionated, do you think that they would have enjoyed this?
That's
If it was a family friendly option?
I was wondering that. I think they would have. Well, for one, we talked with the adventure guides and I asked them what would have been different. And they said, I mean, obviously my girls are too old for this, but they said when there are families on, like during dinner, they'll bring them up into the lounge and they'll have their own little like kid buffet and they'll do activities. So they kind of create like a little kids club in the lounge if kids want to participate, giving the parents, a little time to themselves. And then they often, not often, but some excursions, like when I talked about the beer and wine tasting, they would have had a child geared activity to then, possibly at the brewery, but for kids, right? So that everybody sort of has engagement in it. I think they would have enjoyed it. I think they would have complained. I think you're constantly moving, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are very few times you're just like, all right, let me just chill. So I think for them, the constant movement is
a lot.
Yeah, I think it would be engaging enough that it was always changing, right? Like the scenery was always changing. So if you have ADHD, like I do, I was like, all right, this is good. We're moving on to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. The one thing that I was surprised that I felt like they didn't do a good job at was some companies do, and I will be honest that this one was not as explicit as I thought it should have been in terms of physical demand for certain activities.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think people who had some mobility differences. Like, I think if they were told, hey, there's going to be lots of hills, we're doing 5 miles on this walking tour, they would have been able to make better decisions about if it was right for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's me. I would have complained the whole time and been like, I want to go back.
I wonder if it's intentional so that other people aren't like, but I
Mhm.
think it would be helpful to know that in advance. I mean, you don't feel it because you're going on this walking tour. Like, I think though, like that happened the very first tour in Budapest was a food and history tour. So we went to different places and ate three
Mhm.
different times, but all throughout while we were moving to the different locations, we were going into history and things are accessible, but not always, right? Like, so
Yeah.
like, okay, we're here at the chocolate making session
Mhm.
and the bathroom is up 4 flights of stairs.
Oof.
Like I know it
That's
was like,
Europe for you.
but what I learned was I need a guide. I need a
Yeah.
guide when I go and do the history because there were times where I was on my own and I'm like, oh, I'm not reading that sign. And then you have to read it and you're like, I need someone to tell me the story.
They make apps for that, just saying. I
Yeah.
don't know what they're called, but I know they exist.
And I've used this before, but I will say one of the best inventions ever is Google Translate.
Yes. Being able to take a picture of things and have it just not even just hover your camera.
Cover your camera over, and I've used it actually in education with students who spoke a different language to quickly get them to be able to read. Um,
Yeah.
but while you're standing there and looking at a marble slab from 1604 written in Latin, and you're like, boom, oh, I can see what it says in
Yeah.
10 seconds. That's wild, wild.
When I went to Rome with my grandparents in like I think it was like 2018, we had Google Translate on our phones, and I remember getting in an Uber, and my grandpa was trying to make conversation with the Uber driver. My grandpa doesn't speak any Italian. Uber driver didn't speak any English. They full on had a phone. My grandpa was sitting in the front seat, and they're holding a phone between the two of them, talking into it, and then it would translate, and then the other one would talk into it, and it would translate, and it was like broken. It didn't like make a lot of sense, but it was so funny to watch and like funny in like a really heartwarming way that my like 70 something grandfather is having a conversation with this driver in Italy. Like he's speaking English, the guy's speaking Italian. They're having a great time. They're laughing. And like all because we have this technology. So like yeah, I love it. And I download the languages of the country I'm going to before I go so that I don't have
Quick,
to use,
yeah.
data. Same thing with the maps. I'll download the map of, like, a place I'm going, like, thinking about Amsterdam, I'm gonna spend a couple days in Amsterdam after my trip ends, so I will just download the map of Amsterdam in Google Maps before I leave, and that way I don't have to use as much data. It's wonderful. Sorry that I didn't tell you that tip before you left.
No, but I think, we think about that, even just communication in general while you're traveling halfway around the world. One of the things that even while you're cruising now, I mean, I have AT&T, so it was $12 a day. I think Verizon's $10 a day for
Whew.
it adds up, but it honestly, to be able to, I mean, most people were on their phones, right? I mean, like to be able to get
Mhm.
text, to be able to quickly Google something, to be able to, Google map it, to walk to wherever you're going. I mean, all of that was super helpful. And I think really, um, to kind of close and wrap this all up, one of the best things about it, we travel so we get to see the world, right? We
Mhm.
just go so that we can experience and grow our perspective, and I'm always reminded that when we're in another location that doesn't speak English as its primary language, or right, and you're humbled to know that the world exists in many different ways, and your very small piece of that huge pie is just one version of it.
Mhm.
So being so far removed, 6 hours ahead from Eastern time, it's a good life experience to be
Yeah.
reminded that the world is much bigger than any one single one of us, for sure.
Wow. That was beautiful.
Wasn't it? Wasn't it?
Yeah, that really was. I just wanna rewind real quick and tell everybody else that's not you. don't go through your phone carrier when you're international. That's a horrible thing to do. It's so expensive. So use like I use Airlo. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it's just an eSIM and it's super cheap. So I think I paid like maybe $30 for my 3 weeks in Europe last year. And that was for every country I was in. That gave me data. You get a set amount of gigs of data and then you can like top it off. So if you really like if you want the easiest route possible, then sure, go through your phone carrier. But they are charging you an astronomical price. And yes, they do typically cap it at like X number of dollars per month that they'll charge you. But if you like for us, we're going to be doing 2.5 weeks in December when we go. And that's really expensive if we were
Yeah,
both doing that every day.
I think right. We were there 10 days, so $120. So for me, that was worth it. But um, if you're there longer, which often people are,
Mhm.
right? 2 to 3 weeks or more, that certainly can add up pretty quickly. And what I think was interesting is I was looking to see if AT&T had an international plan that would have been cheaper. And I think what the guy told me in the store, I mean, I didn't go any further. He's like, they eliminated that and now they just do the day passes. Um,
Mhm.
so, you know,
To give you an idea of the difference in price, I just pulled it up real fast. So to do a regional eSIM in Europe for 30 days for 10 gigs of data, which is it's a decent amount. You might have to top up at some point. 37 USD. Like it just makes sense in my opinion. And it usually covers like if you're staying in one continent essentially, it usually makes sense to just so like for us we went to like 4 countries and all those countries were covered. It doesn't cover when you're like on your like if you were on an ocean liner cruise, it doesn't
right.
cover the time when you're on the cruise ship. But if you're on land, it's great. So,
But if you're on a Mediterranean ocean cruise, you're on
you're
land
pretty
almost,
close.
yeah, as much
Yeah,
as
yeah.
you're not on land because you're
Yeah.
usually off the ship all day.
And for
So,
us, we were on Virgin, so, like, we had Wi-Fi on the ship anyways, so we
right.
didn't need it. The one thing was that I couldn't access TikTok. I tried so hard to access TikTok when I was in Europe last, and I couldn't, and I had a bunch of videos I'd saved of things I wanted to see and do, and I was like, "No!" So this year, I'm more prepared, and I'm gonna have the list ready so that I don't have to rely on logging into TikTok.
On your phone.
Yeah.
Uh, well,
Yeah.
I would say get on a river cruise. The cost is not that much because it will always include the excursions for the most part in that. So, I think I might have spent $94 on the ship, and that was partially laundry.
Okay.
And a little bit of alcohol that was outside because alcohol is usually included during meals.
Mhm.
Um, so $94, and then anything I spent before or after for, like in Munich, for example.
Yeah.
But very little spent outside of that, because everything else is really included. You're not you might have to spend gratuities. In my case, because it was an Adventures by Disney, all the gratuities were handled. But if you were
Mhm.
if it was just an AMA waterway or just a Viking cruise, you would have to tip the tour guides and things here and there. But again, very, very little extra money you're spending each time. And so I think, um, definitely consider it as a way to see the world.
It sounds like a great time. I can't wait for mine. And then we'll be recounting that in the new year. Wow. It's hard to believe that it's already October. Wow. Anyways, on that note, Chris is going to send me a bunch of pictures of his trip, and I'm going to put those on social media so that you can see all of the fun things that he experienced that he's saying he can't describe to us. And you should definitely check them out on our social media channels. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. That's it. We have a TikTok account we don't use. Maybe one day we'll get there. I don't know. Uh,
I
but
do.
I know I think we posted like maybe 2 videos on it in the however many months we've been doing this. As always, we appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. And until next time, let's just go.